my brief opening remarks, we'll hear from Melanie Walton and Theodore Roosevelt V, co-chairs of our Capitol campaign. And then we'll have a little talk with historian Douglas Brinkley, author of The Wilderness Warrior, and architect Craig Dykers, founder of Snøhetta. Our program will conclude with closing thoughts from North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. Now, I'm an old media guy, so I don't like to bury the headline. Let's get started with some news. Today, October 27th, is Theodore Roosevelt's birthday. That's not the news. Today is also a day of gratitude. Today is a day of gratitude because the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library Foundation is thrilled to announce we have raised $100 million for the TR Library and have successfully unlocked the $50 million endowment from the state of North Dakota. If we were all together, this is where I would hold. Oh, it's not the same. But we trust out there you're all cheering mightily for this enormous accomplishment. Thank you, Craig. This $100 million is an investment in North Dakota. It's an investment in jobs, construction, economic diversification, and the future, not just of our state, but our nation. It is an investment by North Dakotans with a vision for the future and by those with deep roots in our state. The financial commitments were made without a blueprint to show or a hard hat tour to offer. Each gift is an endorsement and a show of faith. I am humbled by the generosity of the individuals and families who stepped into the arena to make this milestone possible. We will not let you down. 242 gifts or commitments have been made to the TR Library since January 1st, 2018 to today, October 27th, 2020. Now, it would take all of our 90 minutes together to name and thank each and every one of you. We will soon submit our certification to the state of North Dakota, and we have just now publicly released an initial list of gifts. And as part of our commitment to you and the public, we pledged transparency. We plan to update this information every quarter. Journeys like the TR Library are made of stories about people who believe in an idea. Before we hear from our Capitol campaign co-chairs Melanie Walton and Ted Roosevelt, I will share just one story of giving with you. One day not long ago, the TR Library received a check from Helen Hills. Helen is in her 80s. She lives in Beulah, North Dakota. And neither I nor any member of my team at the Theodore Roosevelt Library Foundation had ever spoken or met with Helen. Her gift came to us without asking for it. We called Helen to thank her and ask her why she gave. Helen told us a simply wonderful story. Theodore Roosevelt signed her grandfather's homestead papers on October 10th, 1904. Helen's grandfather, John Miller, immigrated to the United States and North Dakota as a German from Russia. Her grandfather paid $2.50 an acre to homestead near modern-day Hazen, North Dakota. Helen's gift to the TR Library was in honor of her grandfather and in appreciation of Theodore Roosevelt's connection to her family. Every single one of you who gave lives, does business, or has deep roots in North Dakota. And while this will be the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, this milestone, this first 100 million, is really an investment in our state by those who care deeply about North Dakota. People who heard the call to service and helped us when we needed it most. Thank you. My eternal and profound gratitude to each and every one of you who helped us get here, and I know there are many more of you who help us make the dream of a TR Library a reality. And now I'll turn the baton over to our Capitol campaign co-chairs, Melanie Walton, and then Theodore Roosevelt V. Melanie?
Great. Thank you, Ed, and good evening, everyone. Ed, first of all, your commitment to the cause has been incredible. And we are indebted to you, Allison, and the entire team for making this possible and for your leadership this past year. So kudos to you and thank you. Rob and I are part of this journey because of North Dakota and the people of North Dakota and also the Roosevelt family. We are proud to stand with you, working together to achieve this remarkable milestone and unlocking the endowment for the state of North Dakota. Rob and I express our sincere gratitude to all of you, the individuals and families who gave early to make this dream a reality. I was born in Williston, North Dakota, and raised just across the border in Sidney, Montana. My parents, Chuck and Marlene, still live in Montana, and my father, along with his father, helped lay the cornerstone of the Burning Hills Amphitheater. I can say I have been in MEDORA in the musical every year of my life, even before I was born, since my mother attended while she was pregnant with me. And Rob has been to MEDORA every year since we first met. Part of the Mattahey Trail runs through my father's land, and Rob has biked that trail and recently did the Mattahey 50. We have also hiked the Theodore Roosevelt National Park together, and we love to attend the Home on the Range Rodeo. The small town values instilled in Rob and me by our families and communities we grew up in have shaped our lives. I am forever grateful to my mother and father for teaching me the importance of staying true to your roots and giving back to the community. I want to thank Rob as well. He grew up in the Ozarks of Northwest Arkansas, and I'm fortunate he shares my love of the outdoors and appreciates the Theodore Roosevelt's legacy of leadership and conservation. We, along with those tonight, are committed to carrying the torch lit by the spirit of TR and North Dakota. TR's story inspired my own love of nature. When I am asked, why does the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library belong in North Dakota? My answer is always, because this is the cradle of conservation. It's the home of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. MEDORA and the Badlands is the fulcrum of the hero's journey in TR's incredible life. The library will be more than just a library. It is the people's library, a cornerstone for the new American West, a world-class destination and source of lasting pride for the state, our country, and the world. TR wanted all citizens to share a united pride in America and valued a willingness to get in the arena for the betterment of sustainability, our humanity, and our planet. We are all engaged in this noble journey together. Today is also a special day as we gather to celebrate this magnificent milestone on TR's birthday, but this is also my husband and partner's birthday, Rob Walton, and also Serena Roosevelt, who is a fellow trustee on the board and wife of my campaign co-chair, Ted Roosevelt. Ted, happy birthday to Serena, and I'll hand the baton to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Melanie, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on this special day. Particularly, as Melanie mentioned, for Rob, happy birthday. For my wife, happy birthday. And of course, for Teddy Roosevelt, it's his birthday as well. It's sort of an amazing confluence of birthdays. You know, my great-great-grandfather once said of his favorite group of soldiers, the Rough Riders, Easterners and Westerners, Northerners and Southerners, officers and men, Canton College graduates, wherever they came from and whatever their social position, possessed in common the traits of hardihood and a thirst for adventure. They were to a person adventurers in the old sense of the word. But we have a pretty fun adventure in front of us now. And I believe every one of you gathered with us tonight has that sense of adventure. So I want to thank you for joining us on this journey to build the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. I am proud to stand with North Dakota to achieve the vision and ambition of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. As my capital campaign co-chair Melanie Walton just said, the TR Library rightfully belongs in North Dakota, alongside the Theodore Roosevelt National Park, a symbol and living legacy of TR's greatest achievement. We all know that TR said, "I would not have been president had it not been for my experience in North Dakota." Now, because of your generosity, values, and early commitment, it can forevermore be said that Theodore Roosevelt would not have a presidential library had it not been for North Dakotans. Our deepest gratitude and heartfelt thanks to each and every one of you. Serena and I and the Roosevelt family look forward to seeing you all in MEDORA very soon. Now, we get to have a very interesting conversation with Douglas Brinkley and Craig Dykers, a world-class historian and a world-class architect. So I'll pass it back to Ed to lead that discussion.
Thank you so much, Ted, and thank you, Melanie and Rob. Happy birthday all around. For those of you joining the webinar, you may also see another familiar face, Governor Doug Burgum. He will be giving remarks at the end and concluding our session after our conversation with Doug and Craig. So our folks are, some of the folks that are with us now are going to become participants, and I'm going to invite all of you out there in the webinar audience to join this conversation. There is a Q&A chat button at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to ask either Doug or Craig a question, please dive in. Please ask those questions through the chat button, and our staff here will relay them to me. I can convey them to them. So our folks are going to disappear in our webinar, and we're going to have a focused chat, but if possible, we'll bring them back at different points into the conversation. I'm going to quickly introduce both Craig and Doug. Craig Dykers is the founding partner of Snøhetta, a Norwegian and US-based architecture and design firm. Craig has led many of Snøhetta's prominent projects, including the Alexandria Library in Egypt, the Norwegian National Opera and Ballet in Oslo, Norway, and the National September 11th Memorial Museum Pavilion in New York City. Craig also led the design of SF MoMA in San Francisco and the master plan of Times Square. He helped design the Calgary Public Library, which wraps the building around a functioning railway. Craig's leadership has earned Snøhetta many awards and accolades, including the Aga Khan Award for Architecture for the Alexandria Library, European Prize for Contemporary Architecture, and the Mies van der Rohe Award for the magnificent Oslo Opera House. And just this past month, Snøhetta was honored yet again with another distinction, the 2020 National Design Award for Architecture by Cooper Hewitt, the Smithsonian Museum of Design. Notwithstanding Craig's phenomenal career thus far, fate had it that he would design the TR Library. Craig's San Antonio High School alma mater's mascot was, interestingly enough, the big stick. We'll get to that, Craig, in just a moment. Now, Douglas Brinkley is certainly familiar to many of you as a distinguished historian and author. He is the Catherine Sanoff Brown Chair in Humanities and Professor of History at Rice University. Brinkley is the history commentator for CNN and a contributing editor to Vanity Fair. During the 1990s, Brinkley taught American arts and politics for Hofstra University aboard the Magic Bus, a roving transcontinental classroom from which his book, The Magic Bus, An American Odyssey, was born. Doug has authored numerous esteemed books, but for the purposes of our conversation tonight, the most relevant, of course, is The Wilderness Warrior, Theodore Roosevelt and the Crusade for America, which earned him the Network Book Award for History and Biography. Doug now lives in Texas and serves on the Century Association, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Society of American Historians, and his family. And we're hoping to lure him back next summer so he can meet and talk with all of you in person at the Cradle of Conservation and the future home of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library with you. And just ask a really basic question for all of those folks out there watching. You heard us describe the Badlands and MEDORA as the fulcrum and the hero's journey of TR's incredible life story. Why? Why is the Badlands so important to TR and his story?
Wonderful to be here tonight. Happy birthday, Theodore Roosevelt. Story without the Badlands. He fell in love with that landscape. Remember, Theodore Roosevelt was born in 1852 in New York City, and he had terrible asthma. And in those days, New York, the air was very poisonous. This was before, some of the factories were regulated. And he found he got healthy when he'd get further upstate New York to the Adirondacks. So he started believing that nature had a curative effect on him. And he got enamored with the West because if you're born in 1858, you have the Civil War. And then by the late 1860s, all of these, particularly Boys' Life-like magazines, were showing photographs of the natural features of the West, like some of the buttes and sentinels in the Medora area, the Badlands. And his imagination was stirred. And then he heard all the Wild West stories of the settling of the West. And he liked to think that the North had ruined themselves with hyper-industrialization. The South had the Medora, North Dakota, because he went out there in 1883 in September with the idea with $14,000 to invest in a cattle ranch, which he did, the Maltese Cross. And when he went there to pick out the land, 7-8 miles from Medora, and was trying to figure out where to go, he went on a famous buffalo hunt. And it took him forever to get a buffalo. And when he finally shot it, they did a Native American dance around the body, and it ended up being his wall trophy. Got stuffed at a taxidermist, mounted it in St. Paul, and then it went on his home in Sagamore Hill. But it was there in Medora that he got this idea as a rancher that these species are leaving us: antelope, buffalo, elk, and that we had to do wildlife restoration. This was coming from somebody who loved hunting, but we had to protect our wildlife species. And so he created actually the American Bison Society out of North Dakota experience, which then led to the Bronx Zoo saving buffalo, and then led him as president to releasing buffalo in Oklahoma at Wichita Mountain. So it's very circular. Anybody that goes and drives the West and sees buffalo, bison, you can thank Theodore Roosevelt for it. The air in North Dakota, all these forest fires that have been going on in Montana and Northern California, from a lot, Western North Dakota was fresh air coming in from the Arctic. It didn't affect his asthma. And the wind there made him feel like $1 million. And always remember, by saying he was a person of horseback, and he loved horseback riding the region. He used to get seasick on the oceans, even though he was this big Navy advocate. And his spiritual home, his Walden Pond, was the Little Missouri River in the ecosystem of the Badlands. He wrote 3 incredible books about it. He described the rock formations, and he said, I'm trying to describe them the way Edgar Allan Poe would. But more to that, he loved the people of North Dakota. He came in and couldn't see really, had big bottle glasses, and he wasn't really the great hunter in the sense that he didn't have a great shot, but he knew how to never give up in pursuit. And the ranchers and the cattle people and the farmers and the small city people in Dickinson, North Dakota, took him in as a New Yorker and taught him what it was like in the heartland of America. And he felt he was a changed person, that the people of North Dakota represented his spirit, his sense of fairness, his sense of justice, and that natural environment, the openness of the Great Plains and the rock formations around Medora were the place that spoke to his heart the most.
I want to pick up on that point, Douglas, and while we do, I note that we've got a question from the Fieldstone group. Thank you for sending in a question. It's for Craig, and we'll get to that in just a moment. To anybody else out there who might have missed the instruction at the top, this should be an open forum. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear what you like to ask either Doug and Craig through the conversation. As an attendee at many of these events, there's nothing more annoying than hearing the moderator talk. So please go through the Q&A, submit your questions. We will get them to Doug and to Craig. Prem, can you bring up the slide number 2 in our presentation? I love what you just said, Doug, and we had brought this out a little bit earlier today, thinking that it might help us put people in place. I mean, we said October 27th, as we've noted several times during this evening, is a significant date for TR. It's his birthday, but it's also the date on which he married Alice Hathaway Lee on October 27th, 1880. And you noted that TR came to Dakota to hunt a bison. And we have this letter from September 23rd, 1883. You could see it's from the Ferris Ranch, Little Missouri. This is from his first trip that Doug was just talking about to Medora. And he writes to Alice Hathaway Lee, my own tender true love, I never cease to think fondly of you. Oh, how doubly tender I feel towards you now. You have been the truest and tenderest of wives. You will be the sweetest and happiest of all little mothers. she is, of course, pregnant with their first child at this point when he comes to Dakota. And let's just continue on to 3 here for Prem so they can see. He said, later in the letter, he says, during these past 10 days, I have made up my mind to go into something more important than hunting. That's always what a woman back home likes to hear when he's off hunting for 3 weeks, right? I've found a new purpose. Let's see the next bit. And he says, I've looked into the matter, weighing and balancing everything pro and con as carefully as I know how. The more I convinced I became there was a chance to make a great deal of money very safely in the cattle business. Accordingly, I have decided to go into it. This is, of course, after spending essentially 10 days out on the hunt. And then the last one, I love this. If it comes to success, I'm inclined to think it will go a long ways towards solving the problem that has puzzled us both a good deal at times. How am I to make more money as our needs increase, and yet try to keep a position from which I may be able at the future to go into public life or literary life, but my own darling, everything will be made secondary to your happiness. So if we can leave that for just a moment. And Doug, can you put us into TR's mindset in 1883, 1884? Here he is in 1883, riding home after this victorious hunt, and he's going to invest in the cattle business. He's going to have a life in North Dakota, and he's going to have a life in New York. Maybe he'll go into public life. Maybe he'll go into literary life. And then, of course, the world comes crashing down. Take us into TR's world at that moment.
Well, he really decided he was going to be a New York City person and a North Dakota person and go back and forth. The Northern Pacific Railroad made it fairly easy to go from New York to North Dakota. But that western edge near the Montana border was sort of seen as the last act of the so-called Wild West lore. And he came walking in, making a splash into that, meaning he went and tracked down a thief. And it went to a huge ordeal, hunting down a criminal and then bringing them to a jail in Dickinson, North Dakota. But unfortunately, when he went back east and was in Albany on February 14th, the following year, he got a telegram to say, get back to New York City. It was Valentine's Day, and your mother is sick with Bright's disease, kidney failure, and your wife Alice is going into childbirth with a high fever. Well, it was still railroad America. He had then traveled from Albany to New York City. It was still gaslit New York. He goes into the home where on one floor his wife's burning with fever and another floor his mother's sick. And he shuttles between both of those floors. And that evening they both died. And, you know, historians like myself, we read other people's mail for a living, diaries. And I swear to you, out of all the ones I've ever held, the Theodore Roosevelt puts in his diary saying the light's gone out of my life forever, losing your mother and your wife on the same day. They were jointly buried in Wall Street Cemetery. If you go to New York near Federal Hall, you can go visit it. And he went in a funk. And his sister said, Theodore, get back out to North Dakota. You are the happiest when you went west. If I could add one thing to other North Dakotans in particular listening, his first visit to North Dakota, he went up that way to Morehouse, Minnesota, and to Fargo. First, when he was right out of college and he was going grouse hunting, but he also was a bird watcher and was starting to record bird species. But he had a huge fondness for Fargo, North Dakota area, just to give a salute to the eastern part of North Dakota. But that he took his sister's advice, went back out and created a second ranch, the Elkhorn. And at the Elkhorn, and it's amazing, anybody who ever gets a chance in life to go visit those sites, because you can even now feel the wilderness experience and hear the wind blow and feel and take in the terrain there in a way that's magnificent. And he just more and more he repaired his hurt self. His depression left there, and he got even a clearer identity of who he was. And great Frederick Remington did some illustrations, one of his Dakota books, but he also wrote The Winning of the West, which was a triumphalist history of how the West was settled with all of these amazing Western sagas and lore. People may not realize Theodore Roosevelt was actually the president of the American Historical Association. He was a very serious historian. But I would argue, and I've argued in my book, The Wilderness Warrior, MEDORA, the Badlands, is where conservation is born. We're not exaggerating, calling it the cradle of conservation, playing some kind of game of wording. He really got his ideas from there, how we had to start saving habitat, preserving species, making sure we kept clean air, water, and this idea of being good land stewards. Theodore Roosevelt would judge a rancher how they took care of their land. And this conservation vision he had, the gospel of conservation that he preached, had big results. From 1901 to 1909, as president, he saves 234 million acres of wild America. He went through Congress to get ones done, like Wind Cave in South Dakota, or Crater Lake in Oregon, or Mesa Verde in Colorado. He used executive orders to start saving all the birds, like around what he called Sully's Hill and Devil's Lake area, North Dakota, those prairie potholes to protect the white pelicans and other bird life. And he used national monuments, executive power to save the Grand Canyon and Devil's Tower there in Wyoming, not too far from Medora and Western Miles, or Muir Woods with the redwood trees. So he taught us, Theodore Roosevelt, that our heirlooms, our greatness in America were these places, that the Europeans, the British might have Westminster Abbey, but we have the Badlands. The French might have the Louvre, but we have the Grand Tetons. The Indians might have Taj Mahal, but we have Big Bend or Joshua Tree. So he really is the progenitor of our public lands for outdoor recreation, and that it strengthened one's character to enjoy the outdoors, whether it's hiking, fishing, hunting, kayaking, or just sitting and rocking and looking and being an observer, that to him, it almost had a religious fervor to it. So when you presidents, I put him in, he's always ranked as number 4 greatest president, but Washington, the first, Lincoln, the Civil War, FDR had World War II, but he didn't have a big war. What he had between 1901 is he rebuilt America, and he tried to teach us all about the art of citizenship. And what's going to be remarkable about the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, which has been a long time coming, thank you, everybody. Thank you. It's going to be a beautiful site for people to come to North Dakota and visit and understand the Western experience and pick up the valley of North Dakota. And it's a big night for me. I'm very excited by this.
Douglas, listen, the conservation movement is creating the cradle of conservation internationally, not just in the United States, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's global. He's the first one, and he, he was a member of the Audubon Society and the National Rifle Association. He knew that you could do all these things. It was just about loving your backyard, loving and learning. He felt, I believe, I never said what he would have thought, but he didn't like nature deficiency disorder. He wanted people to know how crops grew, what the soil was like, what kind of tree that is, what type of birds in the backyard. And as president, he really helped us promote biology and how to study it in high school classes all over. And there's so many other multi-sides to Theodore Roosevelt. You mentioned the Rough Rider and, Big Navy, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize for mediating the Russian-Japanese War and the whole Panama Canal scenario, the Great White Fleet. There's going to be a lot to learn, but this conservation legacy, as we're dealing with issues on our planet now, is gigantic. And as of this night, October 27th, 2020, the headquarters of global conservation is Medora, North Dakota, because this museum is going to be educating people in the world on smart stewardship of land and water and oceans, and also remembering all the people that made our country so beautiful and protected state parks and national parks and the rest.
It's amazing, Doug. I want to bring Craig into the conversation. So, Craig, Doug just said that the French have the Louvre and the Indians have Taj Mahal. So, no great challenge here. You just simply need to match those edifices. So I do want to. The design, I mean, is very with, not against nature. It lays on the land. Can you talk a little bit about how TR's time in the Badlands and how your design, Snøhetta's design, was very symbolic rather than, say, literal? You talk a bit about where your inspiration came from and what you're thinking in the concept.
Sure, but I suppose I should also just begin by saying thank you. And I think if Theodore Roosevelt were here, he would also begin by saying, go out and vote on November 3rd, just a few days away. Vote. In terms of our work as architects, we don't see a separation between, say, the Taj Mahal and the land that it sits on. So the segregation of those two worlds is not clear to us. So we place as much value on a place as the objects we place within it. So for us, the two are symbiotic. Many people think about architecture as somehow separate from its location, that it's about making the fanciest object you can possibly make, sticking it on the table and everybody going, wow, that's amazing. But that's not exactly how we think. We think about the places between things, the environment that has to support the buildings, the landscape that needs to be formed around it. In many ways, those places are as valuable as the objects themselves. I remember many, many years ago, I was in China, and I speak a little bit of Chinese, very, very poorly, but I try, and I was alone. I like to travel alone. I've been alone in the Badlands as well, but in this particular trip, I was near Nanjing, and I stopped to buy some fruit. And there was oranges were the one thing that I recognized on the fruit table. And I said, I'd like 3 oranges, please, in broken Chinese. And the fruit seller held up 4 fingers. He said, yes, of course, 3 oranges. And I said, no, not 4. And I checked very slowly again Chinese, and I held up 2 oranges. He said, yes, 3 oranges. 1, 2, 3. He counted the space between my fingers and not the fingers. And so at that second, my head flipped over and I said, he puts value on the place between things instead of the things themselves. And that was a valuable lesson to me. And the way we work is to build those worlds together. So the Oslo Opera House, for example, emerges from the fjord, is connected to the water. And here in the Badlands, we see an amazing, delicate landscape. I mean, this is one of the unusual characteristics of the Badlands. In a photograph, it looks bold and heroic, but you could practically wipe it clean with your fingers. It's so delicate. And we wanted to protect that and allow people to understand, which could have been an inspiration to Theodore Roosevelt, the delicacy of this place. That we need to protect it, we need to learn about it, we need to appreciate it. So our work is connected to the places around it, and the inspiration is built from that place. And it's, we hope, as heroic as the landscape itself, albeit a human-made landscape. And you should sort of also understand the difference, that we're part of the creation of this place, as well as the heavens that have created the place that it sits on. Furthermore, we wanted it to be relevant to the people that live there and to the history that brought us all here, the deep history from those indigenous peoples that came here centuries before us, and the recent history of those that came from the surroundings. And you know, Theodore Roosevelt was a he was interestingly quite simple in how he made things in MEDORA and in the region around. And I mean, the little cabin that he made for himself that he sat in the doorway of was just this kind of very simple thing, almost like Thoreau would have made it himself, a kind of Walden Pond of the West. But Roosevelt wasn't quite Thoreau. He was like a flamboyant Thoreau. He was simple, but wow, was he big. So we wanted to bring those two worlds together too in the architecture. Something simple, something very direct, but also very bold. I think that would somehow represent him.
Prem, can we bring up images 7 through 9, the exterior? I just want to show folks while we're talking, Craig, there's a question, and I love this question from Theodore. Great name, Theodore. Age 9.
It's not actual Theodore Roosevelt.
An actual question from Theodore, age 9, who has asked, and as we're looking at the exterior, Theodore's question is whether there will be activities for kids. And one of the things that I really loved about the design competition and the process of getting to know Snøhetta better is if you see all those little ants out there, all those little specks in the distance of this particular image, those are people, those are families, those are people that you are encouraging to gather on the building, something that you did so brilliantly in the Oslo Opera House. Can you talk to how the building becomes a gathering place for the community and maybe answer Theodore's question about activities for kids?
Absolutely, and I love the question. In fact, right now we're designing a children's museum on the border of Mexico in El Paso, which is just under construction. And I've learned over the years that designing for young people is just the most fun because you can throw the serious side off to the edge and, be a little more free thinking. When you're designing for adults, it gets very serious very fast. So we like to talk about young people when we're working, and it often inspires us to make places that will be valuable for those of more senior years. In this particular case, there are a number of places around the building that you can walk to. There's a mile-long boardwalk, which you can see here in the foreground of this image, that leads you around the butte to various little pavilions. And this was one of the questions that was asked earlier about the smaller theaters. I have some of the models here, which I can show you later, but along this place of the butte, you can stop and overlook places, see things in different scales. There's all kinds of ways to experience it, and you get to do that with your family or with your friends, and you don't even have to buy a ticket to go inside the building. It's open to everyone who wishes to explore here. And then furthermore, there are many places here where you can get up high and overlook the surroundings, which is hard to do sometimes, especially as a young person, if you're not familiar with climbing in the Badlands. So we provide some places for you to go to raise yourself up atop the building and view the surroundings. And then, as you just saw in that last image there was an image, this one. We're very hopeful. We don't know if we'll be able to do this or not, but one of our proposals was a little trolley system you could ride from the town of MEDORA along this little road system here that would take you up to the top of the bluff near to the library. And it would be a very fun ride. And at the library, you might be able to get a picnic basket at the little cafe there and go off with your family and have a nice, in good weather, a nice picnic on the butte with the nature and landscape around you, and then enjoy the little train trip back. I know if I was a kid, I'd be wanting to take that train ride every single day. So I think there are many things for young people.
Thank you, Greg. I'm sorry.
I didn't know if there was a second question there or not.
Well, I also got to another question that the Fieldstone group had asked about with the pavilions and distributed site experience. So that's perfect.
You can see them here. So.
Yeah, they're just wonderful. And this is something that you've done in the Norwegian national parks as well. Is that correct?
Well, yes, we have made an observatory in one of the national parks, and we've created the graphic signage for moving through those parks. But it's something that we're interested in as conservation is an issue here. You can't have conservation without education. Otherwise, it's just, putting up some kind of chemical just to preserve it. It's got to be filled with knowledge. So in many ways, these pavilions are allowing you to learn in a fun and direct way. And each one has a unique quality. Some might be perched on the side of the bluff. You can see one here. Little models we made. By the way, these little models were made on rocks and things that we found in and around the site, so that we made these little models on things that we found. And even the original design came from two little rocks that were just picked up because they were so smooth, which is rare in the Badlands to find something smooth like this. And together with a kind of like leaf that was nearby, it created this kind of idea for the building, which is like two rocks covered by a leaf.
The simplest things. Thank you, Craig. I want to bring Doug back into the conversation with a question from Bruce Pitts, who is a former trustee of the TRPLF. Hello out there, Dr. Pitts. Really appreciate all you did to get us where we are. He says the apparent paradox of the hunter becoming the nation's premier conservationist is just one of the paradoxes that TR presents to each of us in our own lives and time. How can the TRPL and Theodore Roosevelt's life illuminate TR's complex humanity and ours? Sort of gets to that duality that you were speaking about, Doug.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. On the hunting part, hunters were the original conservationists in the United States, not environmentalists. Somebody like Henry David Thoreau, we mentioned, writing Walden, and John Burroughs, the great naturalist friend of Theodore Roosevelt, were really writing these sort of environmental tracts. But for Theodore Roosevelt, hunting and being in the outdoors would allow you to the best conservationists were people that if you're a duck hunter, you want to see the ducks come back. You don't want a dust bowl. You want to keep the prairie potholes and water holes in North Dakota alive with life, and that it was simply part of the cycle of life. But Theodore Roosevelt said, never, if for any tree you cut, plant two. And with Gifford Pinchot, he created the U.S. Forest Service. But also the whole idea of fair chase in hunting. This is not slob hunting of going into a corral and firing away for trophies. It was really a different sort of hunting. And the famous, I think we'll get visitors to this on young kids and the teddy bear, which is, the greatest toy, the most ubiquitous toy in world history, coming from Theodore Roosevelt saying no to a bear being roped in the Mississippi Delta that was going to be shot, and that to shoot a captured animal to Theodore Roosevelt was unjustified. And this cartoon that Clifford Berryman did of Theodore Roosevelt saying no to the bear, a toy maker in Brooklyn decided to make it in his honor a teddy bear. He didn't like the name Teddy as himself. He liked to be called Theodore. And a lot of people call him Teddy Roosevelt, but he preferred Theodore. But the teddy bear came in. You think it's easy to be a politician running around with kids with a little bear in your honor and having it named after you? William Howard Taft thought it was easy following Theodore Roosevelt, and he created the Billy Possum toy. Now, none of you have ever seen a Billy Possum stuffed toy. You won't find it on eBay. Because it was something magical about Theodore Roosevelt. As an adult, he stayed youthful and young. And his idea really about the West wasn't just hunting, but to do guidebooks on types of prairie grass, kind of insects, what the soil composition, what are the different variations in species and the like. And so when Americans get to go to visit the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, they're going to get to feel the great savanna, feel what the heart of our country's like, prairie land's like, and imagine it at the time of Columbus, if you like, in the sense of seeing antelope, prairie dog villages. I know people living in North Dakota are used to that terrain, but for people around the world, it's just spellbinding. And so good hunters today, like there are in North Dakota, are conservationists. Are there some bad hunters, people that don't get their license, don't have limits? Yes. But most of the fish and hunting community in America, the ones that take it seriously, are really first-tier conservationists.
Well, thank you for that, Doug. That's I think I Similar to what Dr. Pitts said, I often say Theodore Roosevelt is a bit like a Rorschach test. What you see in him says more about you than it does about him, because he has these dualities. And I don't think there is a necessary duality, just as you said, with hunter conservationists, because so many hunters are indeed conservationists. That's such an excellent point. I want to bring Craig back into the discussion for a question from President Dean Briscani. President Briscani of NDSU, and I have to compliment President Briscani for the prelude to his question. He says, as a nationally ranked research university, very good advocate for NDSU. NDSU sees a library as a living research and teaching site, disciplines from history and biology to geology and range management. How can we effectively unlock the potential? And I guess Craig, I would bring you into the discussion to say you're architecting a building, but really what we're talking about, as Melanie Walton has said and Ted Roosevelt has said, a living library, a people's library. And to Dean Briscani's question, how can we make this a living library in terms of interdisciplinary education?
Yes, that's a very interesting discussion, and we've been making libraries now for 30 years. And of course, our first commission back when I was 28 years old was to somehow create revive the Alexandria Library of the Ancient World, which was a living institution, a place of change, a place of dynamic study, a place that wasn't what we imagine often libraries are in the modern world. Most of us somehow have a picture of a medieval library where everyone sits in a carrel very quietly and copies scripts or is somehow dedicated to one particular route of study. The ancient libraries, like the ancient library of Alexandria and the great libraries of Greece and other libraries around the world, were lively places where people met, they talked. In fact, books didn't exist when the library was invented. There were scrolls, but for the most part, those were dedicated to legal writings and so on. People talked a lot. And so we want to make a place here where you feel comfortable, not only talking with other scholars or other people in your family or visitor group, but talking to strangers, people you don't know. And you can learn a lot because everyone has a story, everyone. It doesn't matter where you're from, what walk of life you're from. You have a story, your family has a story. You have an understanding of the future and where the world is. And scholars will be able, in this library, to meet some of those people who aren't academic, who are from other walks of life. And I think it will help them see things in a new way. Furthermore, because much of our emphasis, not everything, but we have put a great deal of emphasis on being outside, mostly obviously in good weather, but even in what we might call hard weather. You can step outside. And when you're outside, you interact in a different way with knowledge than when you're inside. So you can move back and forth between the interior world of this library and the exterior. Furthermore, we have a number of facilities that are programmed by the people who have been developing this project long before we showed up to build in community facilities, classrooms for young people, probably most of them coming from the region, but also from farther away. Places where you can interact with the shop and maybe clear it out and have a little lecture in the shop. There's all kinds of places where you can learn about things. And by the way, it's not just about history. The sky here is wonderful. It's a place that everyone wants to go to stargaze in this region. By going up on the roof, and we're controlling light leakage, people who are interested in astronomy can learn here. That isn't sort of the typical thing you might think of, but it's part of nature too, the heavens. So I think you'll see a cross-pollination of future, past, present academics and regular folks.
Craig, I want to talk a bit about your introduction to MEDORA and the Badlands program. If you want to bring up some of the photos, we have some great images of Snøhetta's journey So, of course, we went through this design competition, and it's been such an unusual 2020. We issued the RFQ, the request for qualifications, on April 6th. We asked for responses by April 17th. We had 14 get the request for proposal, and 12 participated, responded to that RFP. Of course, among them was Snøhetta. And we did the interviews like this. We did them over Zoom. We couldn't, Craig and his team. And then finally, we got to go to MEDORA in June. We were all able to be together. And Snøhetta, if you want to go ahead and go through, walk the site. And there's Michelle Delk, who's on the team with, and everyone in MEDORA in North Dakota will get to meet them when they're out there. There's taking in the view. So can you talk just a little bit about what it was like to come to MEDORA and the Badlands and experience this place in the middle of this crazy year?
Well, first of all, I came with two landscape architects, which is always a joy because they have an understanding of the earth that's much more interesting than most architects have, and myself included. I don't understand things in the same way they do. And this project is actually being led in an unusual way, primarily by landscape architects. So in that sense, it was a very interesting experience for me. Also, I do have a background that's not dissimilar in some part of my family's history to places like this. My father is from the Chihuahua Desert in southern New Mexico, which has some landscapes that are not wildly different from the Badlands. Even so, the plant varieties are very similar here. A little surprising, most people don't expect that so far north, but it's that kind of a climate. So when I arrived, I felt sort of at once at home, and at the same time overwhelmed with all the information I was getting. The people in the town were just fun to get to know. I think in general, I was interested in learning about, when I go to a place, I like to learn about it physically, but also philosophically. What is the state of mind of people in this area? Because everyone's a little different. Every culture is a little different. North Dakota is even going to be different than South Dakota, or even just over the border in Montana. And I found that people, and I drove back and forth across the whole state a couple of times, and I didn't take the interstate. So I went north and south of 94, and I went to funny little towns like Berlin, North Dakota, and Bucyrus. I think a place called Lutz Valley. I'm trying to remember all these funny little places, and I talked to people along the way, and I learned all the way in between Fargo and MEDORA that this is a state filled with proud and dedicated people. They're practical, but they're also visionary. And so coming there and then meeting the people in the town, I felt the same way. Very friendly too, I should say. People never looked at me strange, even though I was probably dressed a little unusual, didn't quite look like a North Dakota person. But all of that kind of, I absorbed it as much as I possibly could, and we talked about it together as a group. And then I went out into the Badlands more than once alone, which is always I do this a lot alone, so you should never go alone, and I'm not saying anyone should ever do this, but I've been doing it for nearly over 35 years. It's what I like to do, so I'm experienced in that. But you really can. And someone wrote to me, Ed Schaefer, he loved the sense of quietude there. That was the word he used. And you really can sense that when you're out there. And I was there in a good season, so I got to sleep with wild horses and bison all around me. I got to talk to a few rattlesnakes. And, it was an amazing experience. And I think it's in my blood now, and I have to admit, I was pretty sad to leave the last trip. I was sad to leave.
Well, you'll get a chance to be back often. I want to bring Melanie Walton back into the discussion. Melanie, will give you a moment to get into the discussion. Here's Melanie. So your family has such a strong connection to this area. You mentioned in your remarks that your grandfather and father helped put the cornerstone of the amphitheater. You've been to the MEDORA musical every year of your life, maybe even pre-birth, your mother. So I just wonder if you might want to talk a bit to Craig and Doug about the why North Dakota of this library.
Thank you, Ed. Well, I'm just shooting off the cuff here, but the why North Dakota is really the question that has been driving this project, because it's really the first question whenever we talk about this project. People will ask, why North Dakota? And we talked about it earlier about this being the cradle of conservation and the fulcrum of TR's life, but we're really seeing this library as the TR spirit and invoking the TR spirit in anyone who steps foot into the library or accesses it digitally. And there are many firsts for this library, which I would love, Ed, for you to talk a little bit about all the firsts of this library. But as far as for Craig, and we've just really appreciated his full-on approach to really embodying and embracing how can we make this part of North Dakota, part of MEDORA, and part of the people's hearts of North Dakota and beyond, and the nation and globally. TR was really a global president and loved by so many, and so we see this as a united effort, and also the People's Library. So specifically for Doug, I just wanted to say appreciate all your work and your history, your historical content that you've been able to bring to life in the TR spirit, and because that's really what we're honoring here. And so, as far as the TR spirit, how do you see bringing forth the TR spirit even further? We talked a little bit about what conservation was in the past terms, and then now moving into the future, we have these new, young, and vigorous minds that are stepping forward. And so, what does the new conservation look like? There's so many words: environmentalism, sustainability, and so there's a lot of confusion around what is the conservation of today, and what does that mean for future generations, in the same sense that TR created the parks and something for future generations.
Well, thank you. What a great question. I'm a professor at Rice University, and I teach a class on conservation. And students at the university that are very engaged with environmental issues, they ask this question all the time: what can I really do? Climate change is, how do I possibly make a difference? And so I thought about it a lot, and I think it's about loving your own backyard, a localism in America. Love the community you live in. Love the river where, I grew up in Perrysburg, Ohio, near Toledo, and the Maumee River got very polluted, and you couldn't swim anymore in it. How do we clean that river? How do you clean Lake Erie? Adopt a park wherever. Maybe somebody coming to the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library from Georgia or from Arizona might go back and say, I don't have a lot of money, I'm working all the time, but I might be able to be a friend of a state park or a friend of a particular sanctuary, and try to just love and to start thinking about, yes, the planet, but loving your own county, your own backyard. That's what Theodore Roosevelt really believed in, because there's magic everywhere in every county in America. You can have the epiphany of that Craig had of going out in the Badlands tonight. You could go to pick your county, and if you go and explore it the proper way, you can kind of feel this connection to forces that are quite large. And that's a basic one. Beyond that, start learning about ecology and environmental science in a way, if you want to take your game further, and how you can make a difference. Look at different sorts of energies of tomorrow. Right now we're still really, natural gas has become a big one, but there'll be different ways: solar, wind, many other different types of energy sources in the future. I worry about species that are going extinct. Theodore Roosevelt used to say, to lose one species of old is like slashing masterpieces, like to lose one seminal type of animal would be like losing all the Rembrandt paintings. So what can we do to help species in the 21st century? And, animal life attracts young people a lot. I have 3 kids in high school now, but when they were little, animals of all kind, learning flora, fauna, and all, it's really important to building your mind in your education. And so we all are conservationists. But beyond that, Theodore Roosevelt, first and foremost, believed in Americanism. And he believed that our country has to pull together like we do in war, and that we're strong when we work together. So it's really a very community-based approach. And you guys, I never got to tell you this, but I go to Bentonville, Arkansas, and I went, and people said, why build crystal bridges in Arkansas? And you go there, and it's my kids get an education in art. And you couldn't even, so many people are going there. Destinations don't all have to be in New York City and in Los Angeles. The only field of dreams, build it and they will come. We're building here a world-class architectural gem that architecture scholars from around the world will be coming to North Dakota. Add the educational experience and then the outdoor side of it. The Theodore Roosevelt National Park, in my opinion, is the most underrated national park in the country. Underrated in the sense everybody thinks they have to go to Mount Rushmore and Yellowstone. You can experience so many things, as you all know, in MEDORA of the West without some of the bumper-to-bumper traffic. In a way, the quietude, you can get the solitude. You can kind of find yourself in a busy, noisy world. And that's a resource in its own, the solitude that brought calm to Theodore Roosevelt. People can go there and find the solitude, but then at night you could go to MEDORA to the show, and you could go eat at the restaurants. And it's as a gateway hub to a national park, I find MEDORA to be the most pleasant by the way that they had run that city. It's not like Gatlinburg, Tennessee, where it went just off the rails with too much of the wrong kind of commercialism and created congestion and overcrowdedness in a kind of unfriendly way. So our opportunities here, and with Dickinson, North Dakota nearby, great city, university there. The combo of all this is what gets me excited. I'm a presidential historian, and I was little and I went to Abilene, Kansas. And if you go to Abilene to the Eisenhower Library there, that's when you find who Dwight D. Eisenhower is. You go to Independence, Missouri, and that's where you find Harry Truman. Theodore Roosevelt, you come to North Dakota and you'll find the character of our great president, in addition to visiting his home, Sagamore Hill in New York.
Doug, we brought someone into the conversation who might agree with you on making this a world-class tourist destination. Governor Doug Burgum is joining our discussion now. And Governor Burgum, you've put a lot on the line for this project. It's a big historic day for North Dakota. We've raised $100 million for the TR Library and unlocked the $50 million state endowment. I noted earlier that 242 gifts or commitments have come since January 1st of 2018 to date from all across our great state. Almost every single one of those gifts or commitments is either from North Dakota or one with deep roots in North Dakota. So this is a big day, and I would love to bring you into the conversation.
Well, thank you, Ed. It's fantastic to be with all of you. I just want to start out by acknowledging what a momentous day this is, not just for North Dakota, but really for America and for the whole world. Theodore Roosevelt really was a global citizen, and his modern day fan base, unbelievably 101 years after he passed away, is still a global fan base. So we know that people around the world are cheering about the accomplishments that have been achieved to get to this historic milestone today. When you think about honoring Theodore Roosevelt, it goes back to his untimely death in January of 1919. Within days and weeks of his passing, groups organizing to say, how do we honor this incredible person? And of course, in those days, presidential libraries didn't exist. It wasn't until his distant cousin, FDR, created the first one in around 39 to 41 and got that off the ground that the idea of libraries exist, and probably since FDR had one, there's probably somebody someplace that's saying, why doesn't Theodore Roosevelt have a presidential library? And this has been discussed in earnest for more modern history for several decades. In North Dakota, the conversation has been going on for a long time about how to make this happen. But there was some people on this call, and some that I have to acknowledge, that really got us to this new level and a new tipping point. But there are many people to thank along the way who've kept this idea alive, not just for the past decade or two in North Dakota, but really kept TR's memory alive for 101 years. But let me start with the North Dakota Legislature. As early as 2013, the legislature in North Dakota had been putting out challenge grants that they would dedicate money towards a presidential library if the private sector could raise the capital. They upped the ante in 2019 substantially with a challenge grant, a 2-for-1 challenge grant to do a true legacy project, which was that the state of North Dakota would put $50 million of assets that the state had, put them in the land board, keep them in the hands of keep them in the financial management of the state board of school and land trusts, but the earnings coming off of that $50 million endowment would go towards a presidential library. Anybody that's involved in a capital campaign project knows that sometimes it's hard to raise money in any environment. It's easier to raise money for buildings and endowment. But by the state of North Dakota saying, we'll do the endowment if you can raise $100 million in cash from the private sector, then we'll match this with a $50 million endowment. So a 2-for-1 match. And so the announcement that Ed led off this call with today is truly remarkable. It shows the power of innovation. It shows the power of what a challenge grant from the legislature can do to leverage the citizens' dollars, to bring and attract capital to North Dakota, to an idea that's going to touch every school child, every university student in our state, but it's also going to touch people around the world. And so again, thank you to the 66 legislatures, the super majority, both parties, both houses helped support and pass this, and without them, we wouldn't be here today. I also want to say that maybe you've heard from them already, but Rob and Melanie Walton, with Melanie's deep roots in North Dakota and Rob's deep roots in conservation, it seems like there was a certain serendipity where those two were brought together in this place, in this time, in this project. And they also challenged us to think big and to think globally and to think differently about and to dare greatly to think about how this project. And so their leadership has been incredible. And I had a chance from early on in my involvement in the last 3 years to reach out to Ted and Serena Roosevelt. And of course, without the support of the Roosevelt family, we wouldn't be here today as well either. And I want to thank Serena for her service on the board, Ted for his leadership on the co-leading the campaign. And so anyway, what a fantastic thing to have Rob and Melanie and Ted and Serena leading the way. But when the Roosevelts and the Waltons and myself were talking, we said a project like this can only happen if we've got great leadership at all levels. And so that's where Ed O'Keefe enters into the picture. And Ed spent a lot of time at the beginning sharing gratitude with others on the call. But I want to, on behalf of all 242 people that have been part of this founding donation group, of the hundreds of people that have worked on this idea, to all the legislators, to everybody in the communities in Medora and Dickinson that you've invested so much time with and across the state, I just want to say thank you for putting together an incredible team, Ed, and thank you and Allison, your wife, for everything you're doing. And you mentioned Craig Dykers, Ed O'Keefe, Grand Forks, North Dakota, Red River High School. He was a Rough Rider from high school. This was a project that maybe he didn't know when he graduated from Red River in Grand Forks that he was going to be back helping lead this. But we're so pleased, Ed, to have all of your skills in that position. So thank you to everybody. It is a day for celebration and a day for gratitude. But in closing, I do want to say something that really inspired me by what Doug Brinkley was sharing. And Doug Brinkley, I put the bison up here in honor of TR, since as you led off talking about how that got him in North Dakota in the first place. And we've got a lot of great bison in our state, both in and outside the national park. But when we think about what his life meant to the world, and we think about what the legacy and the relevance of his legacy today to this world, some of the biggest questions that we wrestle with as humanity, when we think about what is humanity's relationship to the natural world. And Roosevelt taught us so much about this, and he's got so much still to teach us about it. He taught us about what it meant to be a citizen of a nation, and he talked about what it meant as a nation to be a citizen of the world. He talked about the importance today, which we see in the divisiveness we have today, that about the power of actually being in the arena versus being the critic in the stands. And that, I know, influences global leaders today from all philosophies, tie back to look at Roosevelt and say that that's so necessary, because for us to move forward and achieve our potential as humanity, as a planet, we have to have people who are willing to get into the arena. And so his lessons then were so important at the time. It reshaped. He came to the Badlands and remade himself. And then in the process of his public life, he helped remake a nation. And now we have an opportunity today to not just honor him, but to learn from him in a way where we have an opportunity to remake ourselves again as individuals, and perhaps remake ourselves again as the nation. So the relevancy greater and more important than ever before. I want to close by saying that one of my favorite quotes, long before I ever heard of the concept of a presidential library, but through my life, I've had an opportunity to work on a lot of things that I thought had held purpose. And there was a quote that we often use back in the private sector, where we talked about when Roosevelt had said that far and away the best prize in life is the chance to work hard at work worth doing. And when we think about the work worth doing, when we think about the purpose of the TR Presidential Library, it brings me back to all the people on this call who've reached into their hearts, they've reached into their financial assets, they've reached into their spirit of contribution, and have stepped forward to reach this incredible goal, because the work that they're doing, and I know the list of those donors represent great North Dakota families, people who came here generations ago. Some came here as long ago as Roosevelt did, and they built farms and ranches and businesses. And now, after more than a century, this group, this first 100 million, is either people from North Dakota or people with deep ties to North Dakota. And they're reaching in to really tell the rest of the nation, the world, that look, we put the first 100 down, but this isn't going to be the last 100. There's going to be a lot more that follows, but the Dakotans and people with ties to North Dakota have stepped up big time. And I just can't be more proud of the people that I see on that list, whether it's a small gift or the biggest gift they've ever given as a family, and there's many of those. To see people that are reaching in and supporting something that's much larger than themselves, a true legacy for themselves, their families, and the state. It's really, really remarkable. So I want to say congratulations to everybody involved at this. It's really comes at the perfect time, at a time when people have narrowed their focus to thinking, perhaps how am I going to get through the day? We're trapped in the middle of a global pandemic. This is an opportunity for us to look forward with optimism about the potential that we as a state, and how we can rethink of ourselves as a state and our relationship to the nation and the world, because we've got something to say here in North Dakota. And I love the challenge that was put up by Doug Brinkley, where he talked about the global headquarters of conservation being MEDORA, North Dakota. I love that vision, and I love the vision. Craig, thank you, and congratulations to all of your team and your amazing design team. We look forward to working with you going forward, because we know that we are not building a box within to put objects. We're building a digital library that is going to reach out and touch people around the world from the get-go, but it's also going to be a place where people are going to want to come for an experience. Ed O'Keefe has said, he has said many times that we're going to build the first presidential library where the kids are going to be dragging their parents to that library as opposed to the parents dragging the kids. And that, as a father of three, that excites me enormously as well, because I know that this vision for a presidential library like no other is one that we can reach, and it will shape every presidential library that ever comes after this. So as we close out, and we want to think about what this can do. This library is it's gonna fan curiosity. Roosevelt was such a curious child, whether it was taxidermy or books or nature or how to remake himself, as his dad challenged him to do. It's going to be about empowering people, because Roosevelt came here, remade himself, and then he empowered himself to reach his fullest potential. We want people to come away from this with a sense of empowerment, and sometimes in a world where maybe they feel they have none. And lastly, I think that we want to inspire visitors, because we need to inspire a next generation of leaders, a next generation of citizens, a next generation of conservationists, and we've got an opportunity to do that right here. And I know that the impact that us working together, as Margaret Mead famously once said, never underestimate a small group of committed individuals, because they can change the world, and indeed, nothing else ever has. But when I think about who's on the call today, and I think about the people working on this, I think that we've got a small group of committed individuals. When we think about the 7 billion people in the world and a couple hundred on this call, we got a small group, but they're committed, and we have an opportunity to change the world. So thank you. I'm honored to be part of this with all of you, and honored, Ed, to be included tonight. But again, congratulations to everybody involved. This is quite a day of celebration. And Ed, thank you for getting the very last document signed this morning, because that certainly changed what we're celebrating on TR's birthday, and it'll be easy milestone for us all to remember that today was the day that we broke the $100 million milestone. So credit to you, Ed, and your whole team for that. And so thank you, and again, congratulations all.
Thank you very much, Governor Doug Burgum. I really, truly appreciate your leadership and confidence in all of us. As we close out this session with you today, I just want to thank Douglas Brinkley for his incredible historical knowledge of the region and TR's life. As mentioned at the top of the call, we're hoping to lure Doug Brinkley to spend some time in Medora next summer. So if you're there, Wally Owen, I saw you had a question. I'm sorry we didn't get to it. Doug Brinkley will answer it when he gets there, and I'll call you afterward. Craig Dykers, thank you so much for all that you have brought to the vision and leadership of this incredible, exceptional design concept, which is only going to get better with community engagement and community conversation. We're going to be in Medora, Billings County, across the state of North Dakota, listening, getting feedback, hearing all of what we think we ought to do with the tram and the pavilions and the distributed site and everything that we can possibly consider. To Melanie and Rob, thank you very much for your founding benefactor relationship with the TRPL. Thank you so much for the vision and leadership that you have brought to this organization. Rob, happy birthday. This might be an unusual way to spend your birthday, but it's truly, there we go. We've got a birthday. Yes, there we go. Might be an unusual way to spend your birthday, but we really appreciate that you have decided to give us all a gift on your birthday rather than us giving you a gift. But hopefully we've given something back in the vision of the TR Library as well.
Thanks, Ed. The most memorable day and birthday. I can assure you I won't ever forget this one, but thank you.
Thank you. For those who did not have their question answered, please, you can always reach out to us at hello@trlibrary.com. Our email is hello@trlibrary.com. The governor mentioned it. We have miles to go before we sleep. This is the first 100 million. It is not the last. We were going to continue in our capital campaign. We have many visions and many ambitions ahead. You can donate at trlibrary.com/donate. I also want to, before we go, to say a special thank you to our board chair, Kathalia Robinette, and to acknowledge the entire board of trustees of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library Foundation. It is on all of your good work that we are here today. And one special note of thanks to Kim Roosevelt, who joins Serena Roosevelt, representing the Roosevelt family on the board. It's wonderful to have your service, Kim, on the board of trustees. I'm going to end with our values. We have challenged everyone involved in this effort to dare greatly, think boldly, care deeply, and live passionately, just like TR. For those of you who have joined us, the 242 Rough Riders that are now riding with the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, thank you. God bless you. And we really appreciate what you did to help us achieve this milestone today. And for those of us who are waiting to join us, it's not too late. We've got a lot to do to get the TR Library come to life in Medora, North Dakota. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I appreciate your presence. Have a wonderful evening.
Happy birthday, everyone.
Happy birthday.
Bye.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday, Rob.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, Serena.